Welcome to Fast Forward Diversity and Inclusion. I'm Isa Buencamino.
And I'm Hannah Wilson.
And we will be hosting today's webcast, the second in our pilot series of 12 interviews.
So Isa, for the benefit of everybody who didn't join us last week, what is Fast Forward Diversity Inclusion?
So Fast Forward Diversity and Inclusion, it's a series of conversations that aim to fast forward our D&I orientation. It's about allowing advocates to build from what's already been achieved and to take the agenda to new heights. So Hannah and I believe that stretching our D&I orientation to a more global perspective enhances our ability to empathize and understand the lived experience of others and to do something personally about it in a meaningful way.
So last week we met Medora in the Philippines, and this week we are delighted to be joined by Elizabeth Wright, who is an Australian Paralympian who's based in the UK. So Liz, we are really happy to have you join us today. And as a disability activist and campaigner, we're really interested to hear how you started your journey. What has pushed you to do this advocacy?
I've been asked this question a lot over the past few weeks. It feels like, and it's not a straightforward answer, I don't think. I mean, for me, I was born with my physical disability, which is in medical terms called congenital limb deficiency. But in kind of the community that I'm a part of, we call it limb difference these days. And I kind of grew up in the early 80s where there was still a lot of really difficult and problematic kind of matters around disability and you know, ones that I'm still seeing reflected today. But back then, it's like you can see me in this photo. That was me about to go off to mainstream primary school. But what a lot of people don't realize is that my parents actually had to fight to get me into mainstream primary school. So kind of when I was growing up in the early 80s, the New South Wales Education Department didn't think that I would fit in a mainstream primary school, and they wanted to send me to the special education school in the next suburb across, and my parents didn't want that for me. So they literally had to fight to get me into mainstream primary school. And essentially, I went there for a 3-month trial. My mum was really smart about the way she went about it. I think getting the school on board, she went and spent, I think it was the 2 years before I even went to school, she volunteered for canteen. She went up there and took part in all things school stuff whenever they needed parents, and she'd take me with her, and it was basically to get the teachers used to me, the head teacher used to me, and understanding what my needs were. And so the school were 100% on board in me coming to the school, but it was just the bureaucracy, the kind of the head honchos, the social structures that we kind of live in that kind of make all this stuff really difficult for people, that we had to really fight against. And I passed that 3-month trial, and I went to mainstream primary school, mainstream high school. And I really think for me, it was my parents fighting. I didn't recognize at the time, obviously, I was a child, but as an adult, I recognize now that really they were my first role models in terms of how I had to fight for fairness and equality, for whatever I wanted to achieve in life, or have the opportunities to kind of participate in or take part in life. And so, you know, I kind of looking back, I'm like, that's really the start of when I kind of was introduced to this idea of the struggle, I guess you might say, of having to fight for that fairness and equality, but kind of leaping forward to you know, through my teen years where I did swim in the Paralympics in 2 games and had all these experiences and was really exposed to the wide variety of impairments and conditions that are out there. You know, I had no idea of this kind of breadth and depth of what disability actually means. And I think that was the benefit of being on a Paralympic swim team, of competing at the Paralympics and being introduced and engaging with so many disabled people from all over the world and learning to understand their experiences. And I think, you know, that kind of broadened my idea of what was out there and what was possible. But it wasn't really until my 20s when I went, kind of did a complete 180. I think people always gobsmacked when I tell them, yeah, I went from being like this elite athlete to then going to uni and doing fine art. I think people think that I would have gone to uni and done something in sports or something like that. But, you know, I went and did fine art, and it was during the second year of my degree that I really came across this term disability politics, and I started doing a lot of reading around this. And what was interesting, I think at that time, was I was getting really angry. I was doing all this reading and trying to process these kind of ideas of discrimination that, even though I'd been experiencing, I hadn't really recognized, because I'd grown up in such an ableist society, and I was essentially taking on board that ableism myself. So I was actually creating conditions for myself that weren't beneficial. And I was just starting to see that within me, kind of doing all this reading around disability politics and disability art and what these kind of disability activists were talking about. And I remember, you know, something so interesting that my mum said to me around the time was she actually didn't want me to be so angry about it. And I couldn't understand, you know, my parents who'd fought for me to go to mainstream primary school, and the mum was like, please stop being so angry. And it's like, but how can I not be angry? You know, because I'm not on this level playing field. No one in the disability community is on this level playing field, and it's just not fair. It's really not fair, because the same as everyone else, we're human beings, just like everyone else. We all have aspirations. We want to achieve things. We want to be given the opportunities and the benefit of the doubt about stuff. We want to be able to engage in society, and we're just not allowed to on so many levels. I mean, a lot of people, I think, when they think of disability and inclusion, a lot of the time it goes back to accessibility, and physical accessibility is really important to have, but that's just one aspect of what inclusion actually is for disabled people, because it also has to include addressing the representation issues out there, as well as the attitudes that people have, and the beliefs in certain stereotypes and unhelpful narratives that are really, really damaging to disabled people's chances in life, and also their self-esteem and their confidence and all of that side of things. So it's kind of through that I really came through to activism. And then the past 10 years, you know, with all the speaking in schools, I know this is how you know me, Hannah, through all the work I've kind of done in schools and stuff, where I've you know, the past 10 years I've spoken a lot about the Paralympics, but what I found quite interesting was, you know, I'd always go into a school, do my talk, and then always have at least 15 minutes at the end for Q&A time with the kids. And what was really fascinating was that the kids wouldn't ask me about the Paralympics, they would ask me about my disability experience. They'd ask me about my disability. And it kind of helped me realize that actually this is what kids are interested in, especially non-disabled children. But they're actually the ones that need to know all this stuff anyway. So that's why in the past 6 to 12 months or so, I've kind of been shifting my focus more from the inspirational stuff to looking more at how can I help to support the education about disability in schools to non-disabled kids specifically, because disabled kids, we know what the experience is like already. We don't need to be told, but definitely with non-disabled kids.
Thank you, Liz. Like that's just such a powerful narrative to hear. Like one of our questions was going to be how you move from the kind of the personal narrative to the kind of the advocacy, and I think you've captured that beautifully for us. I just want to go back to like two of the stakeholder groups you referenced there. So I think two of the questions I know the audience are going to want to know the answers to. Number one, if there is a parent with a child with a disability out there listening, what advice would you give them? And like, your mum's an amazing role model, but perhaps she's got a particular personality type and she sounds like a massive fighter, and maybe the system listened. Like, what advice are there for parents? And then secondly, for teachers, because I don't think I've worked in a school that has been that inclusive for children with physical disabilities. What advice would you give to teachers if they had someone in their classroom in their school? Go.
Okay, I'll address the parent side first. And I think, you know, I absolutely have to recognize, you know, I spoke about the breadth and depth of disability lived experience out there. I can only speak to my experience with limb difference. I can't speak for a child who's maybe autistic, or a child who has a learning disability of some kind, or a child in a wheelchair, or a child who's visually impaired. I can't speak specifically to that experience, but for me as a child growing up with a physical disability, I think what my parents did quite well was they recognized that I was growing up in a non-disabled ableist society. They recognized that from the start. And as much as things have shifted a little bit since then, like we're going back 30, 40 years, there's a lot of things that are still very much the same. So I think the advice still sticks, still stands. And that is, I think it is just recognizing that these are the structures that your child is growing up in, and you have an opportunity to provide them with the tools on how they're going to manage that and live in the world as they are with their lived experience in that particular community or whatever that might be. So my parents really raised me to recognize my own skill and ability, and to believe in that. Essentially, they never stopped me from trying anything. It was always like, well, you need to learn if you can do that or not for yourself. We're not going to make that assumption about what you can or can't do. So even though I was an absolutely rubbish runner, I'm not afraid to say that. I know there's all like growth mindset and all stuff like that. I'm never going to be a good runner, okay? Even if I got one of the fantastic like cheetah legs that the Paralympic runners have, I'm just not going to be a good runner. Throw me in a pool, I'm fantastic. On the track, not at all. But at primary school, because I wanted to keep up with my friends, I desperately wanted to take part in like the athletics day and have a go. And my mother, like, she never stopped me from just having a go, even though she probably knew and recognized that I might have difficulties in some ways, but she never stopped me from doing that. So I think it's that just trusting your child and providing them with the tools to actually go out and I don't want to say survive, because it's not about surviving, but I think thriving in a very non-disabled world that we kind of live in. And I think the same could be applied to teachers. There was a story that I shared, I think last year or something like that, about a teacher in year 3. It was our craft teacher, and during craft class we started doing some weaving. So we had yarn and a frame, and we were learning how to weave. And my craft teacher didn't give me a weaving frame or any yarn, but gave me some pictures to colour in and some pencils. And I was really upset because my mum was really crafty, like she loved doing craft and stuff. And by this stage I'd learned how to knit. Like, it's possible, people, even with with like one hand. It's like, so, you know, I was really confident in trying different crafts and stuff like that because mum had always encouraged me to try that. So I was really, really upset that this teacher wasn't letting me weave, just like all the other kids. And this went on for a few weeks. And then eventually, you know, I'd go home and cry because I couldn't take part in craft. And in the end, mum went up and had to have a chat with the head teacher and the teacher. And then the next week, sure enough, there I had my weaving frame and yarn, and I figured out how to do it. And so I think for me, especially in light of physical disability, because again, I can only speak to that experience. If you're a teacher with a physically disabled child in the class, don't make any assumptions about what they're actually capable of doing. Because an individual knows, like whether a child or an adult, a disabled person knows their limitations and their abilities. We know it because we live it every single day. And I think it's learning how to trust that within the child. Of course, you know, there's the flip side. You might have a child who maybe is a bit scared to try new things. And maybe it's that there, in that case, it's a bit of gentle encouragement on getting them to try new things, and maybe working with the parents on how you can approach that and encourage perhaps a disabled child who is a little bit reticent in trying stuff.
Can I qualify that a little bit, to tease that out a little bit more, Liz? So, yeah. So I'm thinking, is it about as a teacher, as a parent, not to treat your child with disability as if they had one? Is that it? Or is it about you give them the choice to be included or not, and you don't choose for them? So which is it more about?
I think the way that my parents raised me, and I'm really proud and pleased of the way they did. I think they, even though there were elements like I had to go into hospital quite a lot as a child, to the orthopedic surgeon and all this stuff, and it wasn't that I was having operations, but because I was a growing child with limb difference, they had to keep an eye on what was happening with my joints, because obviously they couldn't see within me. So there was kind of like this side of life that was very much disability-led or impairment-led. But I think on the flip side, mum and dad were trying to raise me almost to be as able-bodied or non-disabled as possible. Now, I think as an adult, I appreciate what they did. But the more I delve into activism, the more I'm kind of realizing that it is the fact that I think you have to be identity-led. So I identify as a disabled person, as a disabled woman. That is who I am. So I'm not a woman with a disability. I'm a disabled woman, because I think it's important to not deny that aspect, whether it's a child or an adult, because I think then you're denying actually a crucial side of that individual that is going to really heavily impact on their life, on their day-to-day life. So it's not denying that in any way. So I think for me, it's letting the child lead you on what they believe they can or can't do. But perhaps if there is something that you believe they can do, it's perhaps having a discussion with them about why they might not want to try that. I mean, it might purely be a case, a bit like me with running. Maybe I just don't like running. Maybe the child just doesn't like that particular activity, because down to it, they're an individual and they're going to have likes and interests and things that they want to pursue. But I think if it's something that you really want them to try, it's just having that discussion with them.
And Liz, you're such a positive, visible role model for disabled people. And as a disabled woman, you're getting lots of amazing comments about the fact that you are smashing through barriers, you are challenging stereotypes. I'm just wondering whether we, to shock some of the listeners, what are some of the stereotypes that you have had put upon you, or assumptions made about you as a woman with a disability?
I think for me, the one that it's like this is again coming back to things that I wasn't kind of aware of as ableist, or what was happening to me up until I kind of really delved into activism. But one of the things that kind of really makes me angry and upset, and I'll be honest, I'll be completely honest, and this has happened to me in schools where I've had children come up and say this to me, and it's "I pity you" or "I feel sorry for you." And it's really hard, whether it's a child or an adult, for me, on how I respond to that, because especially with a child, if a child says that to me, like an adult's a lot more easier to have a bit of a go at, or a bit more of a challenge back or a pushback about that kind of attitude. But a child, it's like I can't very well see the red mist and get angry and kind of really like challenge back at them. And it's kind of like how I manage that attitude that child has picked up on from somewhere, or that adult has picked up on from somewhere, because I certainly don't feel sorry for myself. I don't pity myself, and it's actually really awful, and it's a degrading feeling to think that someone feels sorry for you purely because of your impairment. And, even just talking about it, I feel angry about that. So it's kind of that really kind of, I think, is the main issue that I have around different attitudes and stereotypes and stuff like that. For me as well, it's this idea of feeding into that idea of pity is tragedy, the kind of tragedy narrative that is out there. Essentially, for me, disability can fall into two very specific but broad narratives, and that is the tragedy narrative. So you think of movies like I think it's Me Before You and stuff like that, which I've not seen. I don't want to see. I think it's a really upsetting representation of disability, because essentially it's about suicide, and that the individual with the disability feels that it's a better thing to take their life for their loved ones than to actually just get on and live their life. And so that's really problematic. And then there's the flip side, which is the inspiration narrative, where I love that there's this Australian activist. She's no longer with us anymore, but her name's Stella Young. She did a brilliant TEDx talk where she came up with this term called inspiration porn. And it's this idea that disabled people were put on this earth to inspire non-disabled people. And it's like, no, we weren't. What I do say to people is that, okay, fine, in terms of the Paralympics, if you want to call me inspirational, that's fine, because you know what? I put in a hell of a lot of hard work to go to the Paralympics. I worked just as hard as any non-disabled athlete did to go to the Paralympic Games. And I did walk away with some medals. If you want to call me inspirational for that, fine. But don't call me inspirational just for living my day-to-day life. It's not inspirational, because I'm living my life just like everyone else. So, and that's kind of the other trap that is a bit problematic and worrisome around disability. So I think it's like these two particular narratives that can be really, really problematic.
So when you push forward with your advocacy, what are the key thoughts or messages that you tend to push out every time you get the opportunity to speak to people or to address a crowd? I mean, what are the key messages?
I think for me, one of my biggest things, because I want to keep it positive. I don't want to shame people into getting it right. I want people to be educated about what disability actually is. I think that's actually a really big issue in society, is that the two narratives that I was just talking about are the two main ideas that kind of people pay into a lot around disability. And I think it's educating past those stereotypes and saying to people, no, this is what disability is. So I try to be, as much as I shouldn't have to be, I try to be as open about my disability as I possibly can. So especially when I am in schools, especially with kids with Q&A, I literally will tell them, you can ask me anything. And I've been asked things from, are you married? Can you have children? Through to, well, what do you do for work? Or can you drive a car? Or how do you eat your food? Or stuff like that, so kind of from anything in day-to-day life. And whereas, I'll be honest with you, if it was an adult in a pub sitting down there asking me these questions, I'd probably tell them to sod off, you don't need to know that. But, I think in terms of children especially, I want to encourage that curiosity, because how else are they going to learn that actually disability isn't this tragedy kind of narrative or this inspiration narrative? She's just actually living life just like I do, kind of thing, So, I really try and be as open about my disability as I possibly can, and kind of feed that into this idea of allyship. So, I really try and promote other disabled people's voices. I mean, for those of you that follow me on Twitter, you'll see I retweet a lot of other disability activists' tweets and work and stuff like that. I think that's really important too, because like I said, I'm not a monolith. I can't speak for all disabled people. And I think if we're going to learn, we have to learn together. And honestly, I've learned so much about disability as well, doing this advocacy work and activism work. So I think it's about that leading to allyship and how we can actually get more and more people and encouraging people to become disability allies.
I just want to mention I've seen your amazing car. Like, wow, what a piece of technology. The first time I met you, you took me to go and see your car. So yeah, Liz can drive and she's got some smart wheels. Just going back to the narrative piece and the kind of the dominant narratives and the negative narratives and your reference to films that are unhelpful. I'm interested in representation. I mean, if you were going to earmark to some of the educators, like books or films or shows that are positive representing of people with disabilities, can you do some signposting?
I absolutely can. So I'll do a show for primary school kids. So appropriate for that age would be on Netflix. There's a show called Llama Llama. And I was so excited when in the second season there was a character called Audrey introduced who is limb different and she looks just like me. I was like so mega excited about this, and I feel so lucky. I got to interview the producer of the show, and I've written about it in my online publication on Medium. So you can find me on Medium. And I've actually written about the interview that I did with the producer of that, which was brilliant. And the way they spoke about wanting to get representation right in that show. So if you're a primary school teacher, definitely consider looking at Llama Llama. If you're a high school teacher, what I would say is, depending on the age groups, I'd maybe watch this first and then come to this decision yourself. But on Netflix as well, so I feel like I'm plugging Netflix at the moment. But on Netflix as well, there's a documentary called Crip Camp. And it's basically a really fascinating documentary about how the disability civil rights movement really got started in the US. And it's really eye-opening. I learned a lot. I knew of quite a few of these people already before I watched the show, but it's really eye-opening. I learned so much watching it about actually where really disability activism really started from and kind of grew from that. So definitely check out Crip Camp as well. And it might be a little bit better for perhaps like the older kids in high school. In terms of books, I think definitely for younger kids, so primary school, there's a book. She's not a disabled author, but the book's called Love Your Body. And oh my gosh, I can't remember her name. And first name's Jessica. I'll have to remember. I'll tweet it out. I have tweeted it out before, but I'll tweet it out again. But it's called Love Your Body. And they actually have she has wide representation in that book, including amputees and wheelchair users in the book. And they're all like young women and they're doing amazing things. And it's kind of beautifully illustrated, beautifully written. So I'd recommend that. For high school, I'd recommend The Pretty One by Kia Brown. She's a Black disabled woman. She's got cerebral palsy, and she's really opened my eyes up to the intersectionality of being Black and being disabled and being a woman. So she's kind of got these 3 layers of intersectionality, and that's a really eye-opening look into the impact of disability and race. So I think that would be a really interesting book for high school students to read, or secondary school students.
Thanks, Liz. So I wanna ask you more about allyship. So from the point of view of an employer, so my background is in corporate, right? So I'm like thinking disability is a really broad agenda, isn't it? It's like it's all in one bucket, but actually, as you say, it's a lot of different things. And how would you, if anyone wants to start doing something positive in this agenda under disability, how do we start? I mean, how do we divide it? Do we divide it? How will it work? How should it work?
I think, first off, what a lot of businesses should do is kind of check out the Equality Act and kind of all the legalities around inclusion that they have to basically meet within the workplace, and ensuring that they're actually doing that. Again, around disability, a lot of the time that can focus a bit more on the accessibility. So, the reasonable adjustments that you would make within a space for a person with a disability to come and work in your business or your organization. And that is crucial. That is absolutely important. If you don't have a space that's accessible for an individual, then yes, absolutely, they cannot come and work. But again, I think coming back to that flip side of, or that kind of dual kind of connection with accessibility is the attitudes as well. And I think that a lot of the time, for individuals who are maybe joining a workplace, there's also that fear of how your non-disabled peers might react to your disability. There might be misunderstandings, might lead to potentially to discrimination or bullying and stuff like that. So I think it's also addressing that side of things as well, and making sure that that kind of people are aware, and perhaps building on that disability awareness and having some kind of training within that organisation. And what I will say is that when you are doing training around disability awareness or accessibility, is make sure the trainer has a disability. I think it's important to make sure that you are hiring people with disabilities, even to come in and do disability awareness training and stuff like that in your organisation, because who better is going to know about disability, accessibility, inclusion, discrimination, all that stuff, than someone who actually has perhaps experienced that. So I think it's kind of making sure that you're meeting the legal requirements, but also that it's not just become a tick box system, that you're actually addressing the wider culture and attitudes within that organisation as well towards disability.
So Liz, I'm just wondering whether you could signpost some other trainers. Obviously you are a trainer, but you're pretty busy. I know you're doing lots of amazing stuff in schools and in corporate spaces. Like, it was really helpful signposting the representation. Like, what other organisations or individuals are working in this space and doing that kind of training in the workplace?
There's quite a few people that I follow on Twitter. So if you go to my Twitter account and you hop on and check out who my followers are, you'll be able to see quite a number of people who are kind of working in that space. But the first one who popped into my mind as soon as you said that is Gem Kennedy. So Gemma Turner. I know too many Gemmas, I think. Gem Turner. Gemma Turner, she's absolutely amazing. We've been friends on Twitter for a while now, and she lives in Leeds, but obviously with lockdown happening, I haven't been able to meet her face to face yet, but we've already promised each other that when it's safe to do so, we will meet up for a cocktail or something each. But she is still doing some online work, especially around recruitment. So in the recruitment process, when it involving disabled employees that you might be looking to get on board. So and she's just a lot of fun. She's got a wicked sense of humour. So I think if you want to have a bit of a laugh during your training, definitely check out Gem Turner. There's also, so she's up north. Down south, there's a gentleman called Mick Scarlett. I know he does kind of a lot of work. I think he's doing some work with the kind of National Rail and stuff like that around accessibility in train stations and stuff like that. And he's a really amazing guy. I think definitely give him a follow, and definitely if you're kind of down south and you're looking for someone down south, maybe perhaps look at him. On a kind of more national scale, there's Jane Hatton. You can follow her on LinkedIn as well. And she runs an organisation called, I hope I get this right, Even Break. And they're a big organisation that actually work with businesses and organisations and disabled people to get disabled people employed. So that's and you know, she kind of shares a lot of information. She's a font of knowledge, really, in light of this stuff. And so I definitely check her out as well.
So to share my experience when I was still working in corporate, one of the projects that we brought in was to work with Leonard Cheshire. They have this Change 100 program where companies are asked to give young people with a disability, and they're broad kinds, to work for you. And it's about that was about like real culture change, that we want to give you the actual experience so that you come to a conclusion about it yourself. So I've had a couple of these young people work for me, and one of the things that I realized when I was working with them was, and I don't know whether this is correct, this is why I'm sharing the story, just to validate it, right, is that it doesn't feel like the things that I have to do to help them feel like they're the best version of themselves is nothing different from what I would do for somebody who didn't have a disability. So for example, I have members of staff who are more productive in the afternoon. I mean, that's how that person was. So I never gave her anything much in the morning and gave a lot of it in the afternoon, because that's how I know how to get her to perform at her best. And so somebody who doesn't have a disability, you would do that anyway. And it occurred to me that it's normal. I mean, it's nothing different from what you would do with any member of your team. Would you say that's correct? I mean, is that an experience that, I mean, what are your thoughts about that experience?
Yeah, I think no, I think it's absolutely true. I think it's working with the individual, and actually, I think, you know, as much as I wouldn't want any positive learnings or positivity to come from the lockdown and the pandemic that we're experiencing right now, but I think what it's shown is that actually for organizations and companies, flexible working and working from home and making adjustments for people is actually a lot easier than they realized. And it was kind of a real echo out in the disability community that it was almost like now you're saying you can do it. Like, we've spent years trying to get you to understand that with just a little bit of adjustment or whatnot, actually we can be really productive workers for you. And I think that's the thing. I think what you've done is correct, and what you've said is correct. It's about keeping those lines of communication open with the disabled person and understanding what their needs are. And I think what people have to realize and understand is that disabled people are really some of the best problem solvers that you will ever employ in your organization, because we have to live every single day problem solving. And we definitely have a very different perspective on things that can be really useful for organizations and businesses. And so I think what people have to remember is that it's tapping into those strengths of the individuals, and you do that with non-disabled employees anyway. So do that with disabled employees, and actually you'll get a completely different perspective and understanding of issues and problems within the company that will probably actually be really helpful to know.
I love that, Liz. Looking at the possibilities rather than the impossibilities, and the solutions rather than the barriers. Can we just talk a little bit about tokenism? Sort of like I think with anything to do with the Equalities Act and protected characteristics, there's always the fear that there's going to be tokenistic kind of pledges and strategies. What's your experience of that, and how can we kind of counterbalance or subvert some of the tokenism, perhaps?
I think for me, I've been self-employed for 10 years now. And the reason I've been self-employed is that I say to people, it's not that I didn't try to get work. I did try to get work. But I almost felt like, you know, I would always get through to the interview stage. And I'd go do the interview and I'd think it went really well, and I'd just never get the job. And it was, you know, there was this very obvious pattern happening that I was starting to pick up on. It was whenever I was applying for a job, it would ask you to disclose whether you had a disability or not, what your gender was, what your sexuality is, you know, all these things which are there for data and to make sure, I guess, that, you know, that they're being inclusive and getting diversity in. But a lot of the time with that, if a lot of the policies would be, well, if you meet the minimum requirements for a job and you have a disability, you will automatically get an interview. Now that's great because it's promoting us and giving us a chance, but at the same time, I can see that becoming a tick box kind of system that's happening. It's like, oh, okay, well, no, we did right. We got the individual with the disability in for an interview. That's fine, but we still don't want them. So we're going to go with this non-disabled person. And it gets so frustrating that you're trying and trying and trying to get a job. And I think that's where perhaps some of the danger of certain laws and certain rules that kind of come in, that they can lead to that kind of system of tokenism, and that, well, we've ticked that box and we've made that, so we're all good now. Look how inclusive and diverse we are, when actually, you know, especially talking about recruitment, you've gone through that process and actually in the office or whatever, it's still not actually diverse in terms of who you've actually in the end employed. So I think it's just being very aware of perhaps that starting to happen within your organization or business, and how you can address that. And again, this is where I think it's bringing in people like, I'll plug myself, or Jem Turner or Mick Scarlett or people from Even Break or Leonard Cheshire or whatever, and really working through and perhaps doing some kind of audit around the processes that you have, and to see, are they really working or not, or is it just leading to this idea of tick boxing and tokenism and all of that stuff.
Sorry, is it my turn? I get so engrossed in the conversation. So, okay, my next question is around how would it look like if it was successful? You know, how would you describe how the culture is, or the way things work, or the way things are when it's working for us? How would that look like?
This is potentially a very dangerous question, because I could just like go way off into like, you know, the absolute extreme of what that would absolutely amazingly look like. And I think for me, I feel like what I'm fighting for is this world where we're on a level playing field, every single one of us, and we're all given the same opportunities and the same encouragement and time and energy and confidence to aspire and have these aspirations and actually achieve them, and not have people doubt us or question our ability or whatnot. So I think, you know, within a workspace, for example, I think it's not that fear of going to an interview thinking, you know, what I just said, that it's just a tokenistic kind of expression that's going on, because and having that fear of, well, I'm going to this interview, but I'm definitely not going to get the job. It's literally feeling the same as everyone, that I have just as equal a chance of getting this job as everyone else. Or once you're in that job, once you're in that workplace, that you're going to have peers, workmates that understand your impairment or condition, and fully support you on that. Perhaps, you know, bosses, employers that are willing to work with you and listen to you so that you can work to the best of your ability within the space or time frame that you can do that. So basically, I think it's just that kind of idea of equity and justice and having a level playing field for disabled people. And it really shouldn't be that hard. And I don't think it's that hard, honestly. And I think it's just people make it a lot more difficult than it is. And I don't understand that. I just can't understand it. It's, I don't know. So for me, it'd be that idea of equity and justice and fairness happening for everyone, and not living that fear that you can't aspire or dream of being something, that you can actually have the opportunities and the structures there to support you to achieve that.
And just to follow that up then, Liz, we speak regularly about inclusive allies. What are some of the tips for the people listening who are able-bodied? What do you need as a disabled woman from the able-bodied supporters that is helpful and supportive and not patronising and pitying? I think it's getting that approach right, isn't it?
Absolutely. You know, and I see so many people trying and wanting to learn and willing to learn, and I think that is really important. And I think if you as an individual, especially, you know, I know a lot of people who follow me on Twitter ask me questions, retweet my stuff, and that is really brilliant. Thank you so much for doing that. You know, I appreciate it so much. But I think what you have to realize is that you are being a role model as well for other people within your networks, whether that be on social media or in person, so in your school or your organization. You are being a role model. And if you can show and share and promote disabled people's content, you know, we see this happening a lot right now, especially with Black Lives Matter. There's a real push to share and promote Black and brown people's content and stuff like that. And I mean, I'm learning a lot with that as well. And I'm really being active in doing that myself and addressing kind of my own biases and actively trying to be anti-racist, you can apply that similarly to disability as well, and just ensure that you're promoting disabled people's work and content. I think educating yourself, again, it's not necessarily my job to educate people about disability. There are so many websites and shows, like just watch Crip Camp and stuff like that. There's so many things out there, there's so much information out there that you can actually find yourself. The thing is, you know, if you're willing to pay me to come and teach you through disability awareness training or whatnot, I'm more than happy to come and do that. And I am very, as I said, I'm quite open, especially on social media, and I'm always willing to share stuff and you know, kind of educate people through those kind of platforms. I think for me, one of the biggest things that I wish that people, non-disabled people would do, and it can be a real bugbear with me, is to please believe disabled people when they tell you stories about things that have happened to them. You know, I know that we're, especially, you know, in the education community, there's a lot of people that love this idea of kindness, and kindness is really important. You know, I'm not saying that kindness isn't important and that we shouldn't work to be kind to people, but I think it's stepping back and trying to understand, especially in the context of disability, what kindness actually means. What you think is kind might not be kind to that disabled individual. And that happens to me a lot. And quite often when I relate stories to people, so one of the ones that I tell quite often, and I get a laugh, I laugh about it, but really it is quite disturbing. But there was the guy at a supermarket who followed me out of the supermarket into the car park. I was really freaked out. He went to his car, which was a few cars down from mine, and he got out a doormat, and he came and handed the doormat to me and told me he felt sorry for me. He was sorry that I had a disability and he wanted to do something. So here you go, have a doormat. And I was just left standing there going, as he walked off, probably feeling really good about himself. And he probably went home and told all his friends, I did a really wonderful, kind thing today. I gave a disabled lady a doormat. But what the hell am I going to do with a doormat? So it's, you know, and it's like, you know, people relate these stories and it's like, it's not, that doesn't work for me. So it's like, you know, being an ally, believing these stories and being aware that maybe not always your actions are going to be seen in a good light, and learning from that. So really listening to disabled people and hearing what they're saying and believing what they're saying, and perhaps even learning from what they're saying, what they're telling you, so that you don't make the same mistakes perhaps that other people have made. Basically, don't stalk people in supermarket car parks and give them doormats, people, okay? Like, lesson number 1.
And why was it a doormat? I mean, flowers would have been nicer.
You know what? $100 would have been nice. He could have given me some money. That would have been handy.
Right. So you mentioned it earlier, right? And you just said a story where you do experience a lot of these things, discrimination, right? And you really, I can imagine why you'd get angry when that happens. So I want to ask you, on behalf of, you know, younger people with a disability, or disabled person with disability, I still have to learn how to use that. What advice would you give them, right? So that they can respond rather than react, and be role models themselves, even when it's hard and they get turned down again and again. Is there anything that helped you when you were growing up, or anything that you say to yourself to help you really be strong and determined?
I think when I look back to my childhood, I think, in my teen years, I think the best thing that ever happened to me, really honestly, and I know I appreciate that this is privilege and it can't happen for every single disabled child, but it's being part of the Paralympic swim team, and that exposure to different types of disabilities really helped me not feel alone. And I think for a lot of young disabled people, it's that feeling of you're alone, because quite often you might be in a school, and this is coming again purely from the perspective of physical disability. Quite often you can be in a mainstream school and there may not be any other child in your school who has a physical disability, or there might just be one or two others who are in different year groups and you don't really interact with, and it can actually feel really lonely, especially when you have to deal with things like staring and comments, misinformed comments or discrimination or bullying or whatever that might look like. And of course, that goes on to as you leave school and perhaps you're trying to look for employment or you're going to university or whatever. It can be really, really scary because you are defined by your experience with disability. You can't ignore that. And I think that's the thing, like coming back to language and identity first, and Isa, you were saying about getting it that right. It depends on the individual. Some people, I identify as disabled person. There are some people that will identify as person with a disability. So don't feel that you're offending anyone by saying that. But I think it's recognizing that disability cannot be escaped. It cannot be forgotten. It cannot be erased from a person's experience, and especially a child's experience. So I think for a child or a teen with a disability, what I would suggest for a young disabled person would be to reach out. And I mean, that is the magic now of social media. I mean, when I was a child, I didn't have this, but now through social media, you can reach out and connect with especially teenagers, with other teenagers. I think with younger kids, so there's a charity here in Yorkshire that creates 3D printed prosthetic arms for really young children. And Jane Hewitt, follow her on Twitter. She's brilliant. She is the kind of chairperson of the charity, and it's because the charity was started because of her grandson, Tommy D. And he is just this wonderful kid who's now in primary school. As far as I'm aware, he's the only child with a physical disability in his school. And he definitely has issues going to school about how he connects with other kids and stuff like that. But the thing is, there's a whole wider network for younger kids out there. Like he goes to pirate camp and stuff like that. So Tommy D has limb difference. He's got a short arm like mine. And he goes to a thing called pirate camp. And there's all other kids there with limb difference. And so it prevents that feeling of you're alone. And like I said, I'm really proud of the way my parents raised me, but they didn't actually do anything like that with me. I didn't go to any group. So I didn't have that connection with someone who was experiencing life like I did. And I think that that's really important for kids to know, is that they're not alone, and that they do make connections with kids who are in similar situations to them.
Where did Hannah go? She disappeared. Shall we wait?
Where'd you go? I pressed the wrong button. I knew Saul was going to do it. Sorry, everyone. I was so excited about my last question. So, Liz, final question of the show. I'd really like you to talk to the listeners about some of the campaigns and advocacy you've been involved in. So I know you've been involved in sharing petitions about parking spaces, for example. I also want you to share the TikTok petition. Just signpost a couple of the campaigns you've been involved in, please. I promise I'll stay in the studio.
Good. Okay, so yeah, last night I had a follower contact me to ask to share a campaign about blocking sidewalks. And actually I saw a perfect example of it the other day. I had to go to the post office and this van was blocking completely the sidewalk, so much so that I had to step down into the cycleway, obviously stopping to check that there were no bikes coming along. But if I was an individual who was a wheelchair user, that would have been impossible to do and to get around. So this particular campaign, which I will retweet out again, is about raising awareness about blocking sidewalks. So whether it's with a car or it's like with a skip or something like that, it's things that are blocking accessible space for people with disability to actually just get on with their day-to-day life. So it's just being aware of that. As you mentioned, Hannah, I did a TikTok petition where I was petitioning against certain aspects of TikTok which were being discriminatory against disabled people, but also a particular challenge, which was the autism challenge, where they were allowing content to stay up that was very mocking people with autism and certain physical disabilities. And sadly, as much as they have taken that content down, as I suspected would happen, there's been other instances that have come up since, and I'm really seriously thinking about how I can deal with this and how I can raise that awareness even further, as it's something that we really have to be aware of. And also, I think another kind of resource, but also campaign in a way, which Hannah did help me come up with the name for this, so brilliant, is on Medium. I have an online publication called Conscious Being, and essentially it is a publication that I've created which is for disabled women by disabled women. But you know, if you're non-disabled, I would recommend going and reading this publication anyway, because there's continually stories being added, and it will help to give you insight as to the lived experience of disability, and perhaps even some ideas, further ideas around allyship and how you can support disabled people. So Conscious Being on Medium. And as part of that, I'm going to be, you know, I'm just going to put it out there, I'm also wanting to be a fair editor for my publication and actually pay my disabled women writers a fair industry wage or fee for their writing. And so Conscious Being is also on Patreon. So if you're able to support on a monthly basis, Conscious Being as a publication, and help support me being able to pay the writers a really fair industry wage. I've just offered to pay my 5th writer, which is absolutely brilliant and I'm really, really excited about. And I couldn't have done it without the patrons that I have already, but I need more. You know, I really need more people supporting this so that I'm able to basically level the playing field for disabled women writers so that they're getting fair industry fee for their work.
Right. I think we've come to the end of our webcast, Hannah. That was quick. So maybe final question for everybody in the studio. I mean, what's your takeaway? What would be your takeaway from this conversation?
I think my takeaway is, how little I know. I think there's so much to read and to understand about everything that's encompassed in the Equalities Act. And I think, as you referenced, Liz, like, we have different protected characteristics that perhaps come in and out of the spotlight. And I want to make sure that I inform myself better. And I think making sure I read Conscious Being more regularly will be a great way to do that. And thank you for all the signposting. Like, I think that's really helpful, signposting the kind of the films to watch, all the books to read, all the trainers to follow as well. So thank you so much.
For me, but for me, my takeaway, my biggest one is more around what you said about allyship, or just providing anyone I know with a disability support or friends, and how important that is especially at the beginning, is to have that in their lives. I think that would be I heard a lot of things, but that was the one that touched me the most, I think. And Liz, any last words from you?
I just want to say thank you, Hannah and Isa, for having me. I've had an absolute ball. I'm happy to do a part 2 of this because I had so much fun. So maybe next series or next season, definitely would love to be on again. And I just think as well, the work that both of you are doing with this, but also beyond this as well, is so important. And I think I just want to come back to role models as well. And I think I want you both to recognize that you are role models in diversity and inclusion and being allies, and I want to thank you for that. I think we need just more people to be open-minded, open to learning, open to being challenged, and also learning from those moments of being challenged and growing, because I'm doing it as well. Even as a disabled person within disability activism, I still get challenged. I want to be challenged because I want to learn how I can be a better disability ally for people in my community. So I think that, you know, it's these kind of role modeling that behavior and that learning, which is so important.
Thank you, Liz. So Hannah, who do we have for next Sunday?
I am really excited that next Sunday we've got Professor Paul Miller, the first Black professor in education in the UK. He's an amazing academic researcher with hundreds of publications, and I'm really excited to hear about the work he's doing across the education system as well. So thank you so much, Liz, for joining us today. We'll definitely take you up on the offer on part 2 in the future. Lots of the listeners would like to hear that too. And yeah, thank you so much, lovely. And I'll look forward to seeing everyone next Sunday.